this.
if you want.
Mike is a professor of sociology and cross-cultural studies at the University of Houston Clear Lake in Houston. He received his PhD and MA in sociology from Emory University in Atlanta. He received his BS in sociology and mathematics from the University of Kansas. For some reason, I thought you were in Nebraska.
I'm from Nebraska, but went to
All right.
University of Kansas.
He is the author of several books, including The Baha'i, The Religious Construction of a Global Identity, which was published by Rutgers University Press in 2000, The Baha'is of America, The Growth and Change of Religious Movements by New York University Press in 2015, and Introducing America with Tariq Hussein in 2018. He's currently working on a book on the history of conflict resolution in the United States. His areas of interest include the sociology of religion, the Middle East, organizational development and changes in conflict resolution and mediation. Dr. McMullen worked for 5 years as a researcher and workshop facilitator at the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. McMullen spent a year living in Cairo, Egypt as a Fulbright scholar, teaching sociology at American University in Cairo during the 2009-2010 academic years. More recently, he spent a summer term teaching at the United States International University of Africa in Nairobi, Kenya in 2019. That's a lot. Dr. McMullen worked for 5 years as a researcher and workshop. Okay, this I already got.
Yeah.
Dr. McMullen is also active in community issues, serving the board of directors of Interfaith Caring Ministries and the Center for the Healing of Racism, as well as the International Relations Committee of the Interfaith Ministries of Houston. He was just elected to the board of an Interfaith Research Consortium Cooperative Congregational Studies Partnership at Hartford Seminary at Hartford, Connecticut. He and his wife, Katie, have been married for 30 years and they have 2 beautiful daughters, Ivy and Maya. With all that said, I could go on and on about Mike. Again, as I said, his best qualification is that he's a good friend. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike McMullen. Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ajit. It's an honor to be your friend, and good to see everyone else, and those on YouTube as well. When Ajit asked me to present at the Austin Fireside, I thought this was a good time because I just got done, as Ajit said, I'm a sociology professor, and so I collect a lot of data about the Baha'i community, the American Baha'i community. And so we just got done collecting data and analyzing data for that research consortium that he talked about, the FACT group. Got done. Okay. The FACT, or Faith Communities Today, research consortium, and I've been involved with that group for about 20 years. And this is the longest running effort to study religion and religious congregations and religious communities in the United States, and probably in the whole world, since we've been doing it for over 20 years. And thankfully, the Baha'is have been involved from the beginning. And so it's great that the Baha'is have been able to be involved, because it gets our name out there, along with all the Presbyterians and Baptists and Catholics and Muslims and Mormons and Jewish groups and so forth. So it's most of the major religious denominations and faith groups in the United States. So Baha'is have been involved for 20 some years. And so I'm going to present, we've done surveys in the year 2000 was our first, 2005, 2008, 2010, 2015, 2020, And we decided to do one in 2023 after the pandemic because we were hearing so many churches and synagogues and mosques reporting that the pandemic had a huge effect on religion in the United States. So we did a survey at the beginning of this year. So let me go ahead and share my screen right now. Got some slides. So hopefully folks, and then I have to, I think, there. Hopefully people can see the full picture of the slides there. So again, the Baha'is have been involved in this long-term research project since the beginning, the year 2000. And we and so I want to I get really wonky sometimes looking at data. I love to look at data, and I've been collecting and analyzing data on the Baha'i community for 23 years. So I don't want to bore people with this, but I want to talk about at least some of the highlights of what we found in this most recent survey. So this was a survey of 300. I took a sample of 300 local spiritual assemblies, and an email survey was sent to the local spiritual assembly secretary. We got 161 responses back. So that was pretty good, about a 54% response rate, which is not bad for an online survey. It was done through Qualtrics, which is an online survey research tool. And I sent out a couple reminders and so forth. So what I'm going to talk about today is some of the Baha'i results, and I won't get too deep into the weeds, I hope. But I also want to compare, since we also did a survey in 2020, so just 3 years ago before the pandemic, we collected data. Remember, it was in March of 2020, things started to shut down because of the pandemic. Luckily, we collected data in January and February of 2020. So we collected data before the pandemic, and then this year, so we say post-pandemic, the COVID is still around and with us, but we're in a different place than we were, say, in the end of the year 2020. So I want to compare a little bit about how the Baha'i community has changed in the last 3 years, but also compare it to how other religious groups, and mostly we're looking at churches here. So I have some of the results from the full research study. So this includes thousands of churches. It includes 161 Baha'i communities. There's also mosques and synagogues and Buddhist temples and Hindu temples and so forth. So again, I don't want to get too hooked, caught up in the data, but I love this stuff. This is interesting to me. But as we go through, I guess, Ajit, should we wait till the end to have questions? Would that be best, you think?
Your call, if you're comfortable.
Okay.
Well,
if questions come in, maybe Adib can give me a signal or something, or so we don't forget them. Otherwise, we'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions.
For sure.
All right, thanks. So first off, we looked at, of course, Baha'is. I had to modify the original survey because it was most of the groups involved in this research consortium are Christian churches. So they're asking about Sunday church services, or maybe Saturday church services, or Saturday synagogue services. So I had to talk about feasts and ask about feasts, and so the comparison is not exact, but we tried to do our best. And so as of 2023, so earlier this year, average in-person feast attendance was 13.8 people per feast. So that's hard to, we can't compare that to churches. Some, especially large churches, have thousands of people attending on a weekend. Baha'is certainly don't have that situation. But the average as of this year, 13.8 people attending Feast. That's down about 17% from the 2020 survey. So we're down a little bit in terms of Feast attendance. But what we found in the larger 2023 survey is that church attendance is down about 37% from before the pandemic and now. So all religious groups saw a decline during the pandemic. We had about a 17% decline. Churches had about a 37% decline. To put that in a little more context, since we started collecting data in 2000, average Baha'i attendance at Feast, which is our once every 19-day main worship, has been pretty steady at 16, 17, or 18 people per feast for the average community. So we have been steady up until this most recent survey, where we had a small decline after the pandemic. However, churches have had a 50% decline in attendance over the last 20 years. So they had a 50% decline between 2020, about 2000 and 2020, and then another 37% decline after the pandemic. So Christian churches are struggling to get people back after the pandemic. So we were about 16 people before the pandemic, and that had been steady 16, 17 for 20 years. Then we're slightly down this year. Does your community hold online or virtual worship, either live streamed or recorded? And the Baha'i community said about 84% said that during the pandemic, they went online. The average attendance for online feasts was not quite 11 people. So that's consistent with what other churches found, that online attendance was not as high as in-person attendance. And as I talked to my community members and other Baha'i community members, a lot of them said, I'd rather attend in-person feasts because I like the personal connection. And we didn't really like feasts on Zoom during the pandemic. We attended, but obviously not as much. The attendance went down. So I think religious groups found the same thing that colleges and schools and other groups found, that the loss of personal connection during a Zoom meeting, they're very convenient, but it's not, you don't have that personal connection and that personal relationship. Did you offer online or virtual worship in 2019 or before? So before the pandemic, almost 94% of Baha'i communities said no. So most Baha'i communities went online as a result of the pandemic, but hadn't been online before that. And what was in 2009? If you did do online, average attendance was about 11 persons per feast. And I'm looking at some chat questions. Did anyone on Austin participate in the survey? I'll look that up at the end there. Ajit asked, are we saying that post-pandemic attendance is lower than pre-pandemic? Yes, we are. So again, we were 16, 17, 18, and then it was down to about 13.8.
Can I interrupt here?
Sure.
Is the reduction in attendance, are you attributing it directly to the pandemic or other causes?
Well, that's a great question. if it's other causes, I'm not sure. I don't know that we asked the right questions on this particular survey to get at that, to try to tease that out. Many churches said that they have tried to get people back to attend church services, but people kind of drifted away and weren't interested in coming back. I don't know if that's the issue with Baha'is, or whether people got out of the habit of attending feast in person. So I'm not sure if it was just a pandemic and we're still kind of recovering from that and getting back into the habit of face-to-face attendance, or whether it was something else. I'm not sure. Do you have an idea about that, Ajit?
I just emailed an article to the National Assembly that I'm going to email to you.
Oh, okay, please. Yeah, but that's a great question. Why is attendance? Well, for churches, they've been losing attendance for the last 20 years. Baha'is haven't. We've stayed pretty steady, but in the last 3 years, we've declined some. So we just need to, I guess, pay attention and look into that. Will you still be offering virtual or online worship in 5 years? Just kind of projecting to see if people are still wanting to do this. 55% of Baha'i communities said yes. But a lot are unsure. About 40% are not sure if they're going to be still online or doing virtual worship. I know, just as an aside, my community, I'm in the Houston area. I'm in suburban Houston. My community's gone back to pretty much mostly face-to-face feasts. Occasionally we'll have a Zoom feast, just if we can't find somebody to host it that particular month. But all of our LSA meetings continue to be on Zoom. So our administrative meetings, we've stayed online, but our worship and our worship has gone back to face-to-face. Platforms used for online or virtual worship. Most Baha'i communities used Zoom, 77%. A few used Facebook, a few used YouTube. Very few people did podcasts, and none that we surveyed used television. So most Baha'i communities availed themselves of Zoom. So then we asked about participants, who was participating, and this was some good news. So how many persons, including children, regularly participate once a month or more, that was the definition, in worship or other religious activity in your community? And Baha'i results showed about 27 people on average participate in a month in various things, Ruhi classes, children's classes, feast, etc. And that number 27 has been consistent for 20 years. So when you look at the larger Baha'i activities, the pandemic does not seem to have affected Baha'i participation as a whole, which is great. Churches saw about a 30% decline overall activity and attendance, especially with religious education. I've got a couple slides a little bit later. Worship attendance is down about a third, but attendance at children's Sunday school for churches or adult at classes is down 50 to 60%. So the church folks that I talk to are very concerned because they haven't recovered from those losses. Luckily, it looks like our communities have stayed fairly active and are as many people are attending now as were before the pandemic. So that's good news. Of all regularly participating adults, 18 and over, what percent are female? Our survey found almost 57%. That's a little bit higher than in previous surveys. are new to the community since 2020, about 9%. And then volunteer regularly in the community. Baha'i survey just this year showed almost 40% said they volunteered regularly. That's about 10% higher than it was before the pandemic. So again, interesting. Baha'i communities, it looks like, stayed pretty active throughout the pandemic and currently. Feast attendance is down a little bit, but other kinds of activities and volunteering and activity in the community still seems to be pretty high. And again, I'm looking at the chat again real quick just to make sure I don't lose these here. Stephen said there's a tiny population that use Second Life for a kind of virtual community, but they also didn't have a secretary. People were scattered internationally, forming a kind of community online. I guess you're talking about yeah, I'm trying to read this here. Those are Baha'i communities that use Second Life. And I've heard we didn't capture any of that in the survey. Nobody put that in the survey that we just most recently did. But I've heard a lot of churches went into Second Life and used that as a forum to do basically virtual or online worship. Of the regular participants, how many are the following age groups? This hasn't changed much over the last 3 or 4 surveys that we've done for the Baha'i community. The bottom line for this is that the Baha'i community is aging slightly. The average age is getting higher. It's about 44 right now, which means we're aging but not replacing a lot of the younger folks with new kids or keeping our kids. So that is of concern for most religious groups, that the people who attend religious services are aging. That's true in the Baha'i community. It's true in most of the churches. The average age of Baha'is is 44 right now from our research, but for many churches, it's 67 or 68. So their average age is much older. Let's see. How many participants are of different ethnic groups? This is part of the normal question that's asked in the fact survey. What we found is that about a third of Baha'i communities, for the average community, about a third of the members are non-white. So there is some diversity in the Baha'i community. In other research that I've done, when looking at what in the sociology of religion, we say that a church or a religious group is multiracial if at least 20% of the members are of a non-majority ethnic group. So that might be 20% of the membership is African American and the majority are maybe white. Only about 5% of churches in the United States are multi-ethnic. But my research through FACT has found that over half of Baha'i communities are multi-ethnic. So again, I think our emphasis on racial diversity and the unity of humanity and unity and diversity is reflected in the fact that we have considerable diversity in our communities, at least ethnic diversity. Let's see, I'm just looking at the time here. And I want to leave time for questions because I want to hear how other people think their communities have, how well they've done responding to the pandemic. I'm going to skip Mission and identity, those numbers have remained strong for the Baha'i community. For programs, a couple things to look at. In terms of children's classes, well, you can see here, based on data that was collected just this year, about half of Baha'i communities have in-person children's classes. Very few are offered online. A few are both. But so most of the children's classes that are offered, most of the communities offer their children's classes in a face-to-face format. If you look at race unity activities, about a third of communities don't have race unity activities, but during the pandemic, about a third had them in person, about 10% offered them online, and almost 20% offered them in both online and in person. So we still kept up a fairly strong program of race unity activities, despite the pandemic. And Ruhi study circles, these numbers haven't changed, or at least still 90%. That's what I found the last 3 surveys, that about 90% of Baha'i communities are actively engaged in offering Ruhi classes and study circles as part of the effort to educate the community. But you can see the bottom here, about 21%, almost 22% offered them in person, about the same number offered them online, and almost half, or 46% of Baha'i communities offered both online and face-to-face Ruhi classes. So I thought this was really interesting that, and again, I'm looking at adult education in the larger survey among churches. That was down 60% for the churches during the pandemic. But Baha'is did a pretty good job of keeping Ruhi going and offering it both face-to-face and online. I'll probably not spend a whole lot of time on this slide either, just in the interest of time. How does your community emphasize the following personal and family religious practices? As you can see, we emphasize, according to the local spiritual assembly secretaries, we emphasize it quite a bit or a lot, either personal religious practices, fasting, talking about the faith, observing restrictions on holy days, not working on holy days, parents talking about the faith with their children, trying to live out all aspects of your life with your faith, and then regular feast attendance. So we still remained, we still emphasized most of those things throughout the pandemic. Let's see. So some interesting stuff I want to point out here. Again, because this survey was mostly going to churches, the fact researchers wanted to find out, are churches doing more? Was there more hardship in their congregations, so they had to offer more food assistance or financial assistance? In Baha'i communities, this increased a little bit, where the local assembly was offering various kinds of assistance, whether it's material or spiritual guidance. Some of that increased among the Baha'i community. But in terms of the amount of donations coming from the community members, we did have a slight decrease during the pandemic. About 13.5% of local assemblies reported that they had a decline in financial contributions. But churches had a 30% decline. We had a little bit of a decline in participation in children's classes, but again, churches had a 60% decline, and adults participating in study circles, there was some decline, about 14% reported by assemblies there. So I'm not trying to say we're better than the churches, but just kind of get a larger comparison that education efforts, religious education efforts, was a struggle for all religious groups throughout the pandemic. Everybody saw some decline. We had less of a decline than some other groups, but everybody was struggling to maintain religious education as well as worship. So both of those things were a struggle throughout the pandemic. This was more geared toward churches, but the question was also asked about, has religious leadership of the community encouraged your congregation to get vaccinated? About 43 or 44% of local assemblies reported that they did encourage vaccination. For churches, that number was 62%. So churches were a little more aggressive in that. Did a medical professional address the community? About 13% of Baha'i community said that. The number was 28% for churches. So then we asked about just kind of the attitude of the religious group toward the pandemic. The community has struggled to adapt to the pandemic restrictions. About a quarter of Baha'i communities agreed with that there was struggles to adapt to the lockdown and the changes that happened. The community is emerging from the pandemic stronger than before. 57% of Baha'i communities agreed with that. So that was positive. As a result of the pandemic, we're thinking in new ways about our future mission. About 57% agreed with that. The activities of this community have continued without major disruption. So about 63% of Baha'i communities agreed with that as well. I was interested in this one because we felt that in my local community a lot. We have struggled to maintain contact and community between community members. So trying to keep people together and cohesive and unified. About half agreed with that, and that's the exact number. 50% of churches agreed with that statement, that it was a struggle to maintain contact throughout the pandemic. So religious groups seem to share that particular struggle, that when you weren't meeting face to face and maybe you were only meeting virtually, it was a struggle to maintain that contact. There's a lot of numbers here. I just want to highlight the two at the bottom right hand corner for the Baha'i community. So here, check below if you're only started using this since the beginning of the pandemic. So 42% of Baha'i community said that since the pandemic began, they were holding administrative meetings online. And I know our community, the one I'm in, our local assembly meetings completely have gone online and have stayed online. Feasts are now face to face, but administrative meetings are still online. And then you're holding deepenings or Ruhi study circles online, and 40% said they started that throughout the pandemic. So again, Baha'i communities responded with using technology as a result of the changes that went down. If your community uses online giving, approximately what percentage of your regular monthly giving is received through online? And the Baha'is said 81%, or 81% of community said that they now get, or 81. The average was 81% of the giving, the monthly giving to the local assembly was through online means. And what percentage of your participants donate online? The average was 65%. So we've shifted as a result of the pandemic to more online contributions, either through the national system or through some other means. This I found really interesting. Does your community have a web presence? Yes, with our own web address, only 25%. I would have thought more local assemblies, local communities would have a website. But according to the research we did, only about a quarter. About 17% said they have a web presence on Facebook, 20% use both. But then a little over a third of the community said they don't have a web presence at all. So I thought that was interesting. I would have thought it would be higher. I'm not sure why. Maybe because we do, but
Because they have no youth in their community, Mike.
well, that could be. You need a young person to run the website, and yeah, my daughter runs the one for my community. She's young and knows how to do that, so maybe that might be part of it. Has your use of technology changed since the pandemic? 41 said quite a bit. 31% said a lot. So again, most communities adapted to that change throughout the pandemic. What was the total amount of money your community received from all sources in your most recent fiscal year? So the average is about 17,500 for Baha'i communities. If you look at the average, but large communities pull that average up. So if you look at the median, so 50% get less than this, 50% get more than this, it's almost $12,000. What I thought was interesting was pre-pandemic, the median budget or the median income, average income for a community was about $12,466. And after the pandemic, it was down a little bit, about 4%. But that wasn't bad. So kind of the bottom line, what we were interested in especially is how are religious groups doing as a result of the pandemic? If you look at attendance is down for Baha'is about 17%. Our financial giving is only down about 4%. Right? For churches in general, attendance is down almost 37% before the pandemic and after. Financial giving is down about 30% as well. Right? So again, looking at how is religion doing as an institution in the United States as a result of the pandemic, all groups are down in attendance and all groups are down in financial giving or their budget. Baha'is are less so among those groups, but we're down a little bit as well. Let's see. I'm gonna skip through. I'm looking at the time here.
If I could comment on that, Mike.
Please.
Overall, though, our expenses went down dramatically for those communities that had Baha'i centers. We didn't turn the lights on, the AC wasn't on, the trash wasn't being picked up, etc.
Right.
Overall, net, I think we came out slightly ahead. We had more money than we expected to.
Right. And if I remember, yeah, and our expenses went down. I live in a community where we don't have a center. We meet in each other's homes, but we didn't do as many teaching projects. We didn't do as many outreach efforts. We did a good job of keeping our own community functioning at LSA meetings and Ruhi circles and children's classes and so forth, but we didn't spend as much money on outreach. Of course, everyone was locked down for 18 months or so. So that may have played in a part of it as well. If I remember right, excuse me, 93% of Baha'i communities in the United States meet in each other's homes. Only about 7 or 8%, if I remember right, either rent or have purchased the center. So most communities don't have that expense, but you're right, Ajit, that was it was that those expenses probably went down as well. Let me just there's some other data. I'm going to just fly through that. I'm not going to present it. The last question we had on the survey was, what is the current outlook on your community's future? And 59% said it was very positive. I put somewhat negative, but that should be somewhat positive, and that was 33%. So most Baha'i communities came out of the pandemic pretty positive. Attendance is down slightly, giving is down just a little bit, but most education efforts were kept up. Most assembly activity was maintained, and most communities have a pretty positive outlook about the future. So I'm going to pause there and see if there are any comments or questions. It'd be interesting to hear from some of the folks online if did your community experience the pandemic in a negative way, in a positive way? Were there positive things that came out of it, or just any comments?
Question from Stephen Collins from YouTube.
Okay.
He says, I'm wondering what virtual methods they used before 2019. I know there was a group that used Skype for isolated Baha'is, but that may not have been in the survey.
Skype was mentioned, and I think Zoom was around before the pandemic, but it really became used frequently as a result of the pandemic. I know Skype was probably used as well. I wondered the same thing. What online platform was used? And it might have been Facebook. It might have been Skype. Yeah.
Also, Stephen follows up and he says, my own thoughts on that question. I wonder if anyone used to use GoToMeetings or GoToWebinars, which admittedly have a much more corporate feel to them, or maybe Second Life. Have you seen any evidence of this?
We didn't ask about those particular platforms. I think the ones that were mentioned were Skype and Facebook and Zoom. But I've heard, now I've not heard of any Baha'i communities using Second Life, so that would be interesting to see. And as I understand Second Life, and correct me if I'm wrong, some of those who are familiar with it, it's where you can actually you become an avatar and enter this virtual world, and the head researcher for the United Church of Christ, one of the more liberal Protestant groups, said that a whole church was established completely in Second Life. And so it was people from around the country who they designed a church in the virtual world, and people joined through an avatar, and they attended church and listened to a sermon and sang songs. And so some groups have pursued that. I've heard some universities have experimented with that, where you could attend class through Second Life and so forth. I have not heard of Baha'i communities that have done that, but if they have, let me know about them, because that'd be interesting to look at.
I got news for you.
Yeah.
A follow-up from Stephen Collins on this question. There was a tiny population that used Second Life for a kind of virtual community, but they also didn't have a secretary. The people were scattered internationally, forming a kind of community online.
Interesting.
Interesting. For those of you that don't know Stephen Collins is a historian who does a lot of stuff on Baha'ípedia. Many, many articles on Baha'ípedia. In fact, I think most of them are Stephen Collins's writing. So, Adib and I are kidding each other that during the virtual assembly meetings, we both had 100% assembly attendance, both of us. Wow. Okay, any other questions online here? I'm scrolling. Adib Masumian comments that Zoom was indeed around before the pandemic, but almost no one I knew had heard of it at that time.
Right.
The pandemic definitely led to massive popularity. And then Stephen Collins writes, I should say my community had a negative experience. We had a collection of events that had a majority non-Baha'is and Baha'is from neighboring communities. I wish, Stephen, you would come on Zoom so we can see you and you can talk. He adds, another measure is we had one declaration per year across 2015 to 2019 from these meetings. Also, about Second Life, the Baha'is are somewhat centered in Los Angeles, but a significant number come from other countries' time zones. There is a sophisticated center / temple, etc., with meetings. No, Stephen Collins is in North Carolina, for those of you that are curious.
Right. We did it. The survey, the one that went out this year, also had two open-ended questions at the end. What has been the most successful adaptation you made in response to the pandemic? And what is the biggest challenge you had as a result of the pandemic? And what I thought was interesting as I read through the written comments is that there were almost as many people who said that using Zoom was a challenge as said that using Zoom was the most successful adaptation we made. So there was a interesting split. People who thought Zoom was a great way to stay in touch and to conveniently get together and be able to see each other, and it was a way to stay connected. But then, almost as many people said, Zoom felt impersonal, and it was hard to bring new people in, and it was hard to stay personally connected to people. So it was interesting that using the technology that made a lot of feast and LSA meetings and Ruhi study circles possible was seen as a positive or a negative by almost equal numbers of people. And it's almost the same thing I hear from students at the University of Houston about online classes. Some of them love the convenience and using the technology to stay connected to other students and the professor, but some would rather be face-to-face in the classroom. So it'd be interesting to do more research about is it a particular kind of person that that's okay with Zoom or would rather be face-to-face, or how does that work?
I pose a question, and that is, do you expect people to start coming back to their places of worship, or is this decrease in attendance a permanent feature?
That is a great question. That's what everybody's trying to figure out. What other research that I've seen seems to indicate is the demographic group that is checked out of religion most are young people. So millennial generation or Gen Z, those folks are, although they're the most technologically savvy, they're less interested in attending organized religion, at least. So among that group, unless something changes, you know, I think it's going to be very difficult to bring them back into religion, whether it's church or Baha'i communities or synagogues or whatever.
Do we qualify as an organized religion?
I would say we're organized, yeah.
I'm sorry.
We've got
Okay.
a structure, we've got a system. What millennials seem to like is just kind of do-it-yourself individual spiritual practices. But anything organized where there might be laws or expectations about behavior, that seems to be what they've rejected. So
There's a question here from Adib. He says, I know the survey measured how many communities have gone back to in-person or maintain virtual meetings, but did it also gauge a willingness to continue accommodating hybrid options, like a blend of Zoom and face-to-face?
yes, it did. And what Baha'i community seemed less able to adapt to some kind of blended system. And I think I'm wondering if some of that is because most Baha'i communities don't have a permanent worship space. We go to each other's homes, and it's hard to set up cameras and a way to have a virtual presence. I know I've talked to a lot of people who work in churches, and they said, well, we're staying with hybrid worship throughout from here on out because we invested so much in the infrastructure to get cameras in the church and microphones and etc. And somebody, knowledgeable people who can run the PowerPoint slides and the live streaming and so forth. So once we've set that up and had that expense, we might as well keep doing it. And some percentage of our worshipers will still continue to do that. I think that's harder to do that when you meet in each other's homes. So I know we have tried, in my community, have tried to have hybrid feasts. So we meet in somebody's home, but we set up a laptop, and 2 or 3 people might dial in, but they're on, we don't have a camera seeing everything, and maybe the sound isn't so great, and we have to move the laptop around depending upon who's speaking, and meeting in people's homes does not lend itself to a hybrid experience. That would be my initial take on that.
And
That's a good question.
Also, we really don't, most Baha'i communities don't have great technology available to accommodate hybrid. We just don't.
Right.
Yeah. There was a question from Steve Collins. Is the activity of youth a problem across religions?
Yes. Yeah. Every major religious group in the U.S., I think even Baha'is, are struggling to keep our young people. Even groups that historically have done a really good job of it, like the Mormons, they're struggling to keep their youth as well. So I don't, as a sociologist, I don't know if that's a generational effect or, there's some other, there's more distractions for young people, and religion becomes less interesting, or there's lots of scandals in religion, so it turns people off. I'm not sure, but yeah, keeping young people is a struggle for all groups, even groups that historically have done a good job of it. That's why the average age of churches and synagogues keeps going up, because there's fewer young people. And if you're 40 and you're going to church, or you're going to a religious service, you're probably going to keep doing it throughout your life. But if you're young and you don't get involved, it's harder to kickstart that after a certain age.
Which brings up a question, Mike. Many people, when they are in their 30s, mid-30s, 40s, they're married and they start having children. Are they not should they not be thinking about, how do I raise my child? Do I take my child to a church, a mosque, synagogue, etc.? Isn't that a big concern of parents? Or are you suggesting that parents no longer think that church is a good thing for their children?
That is a great question. And up until, I don't know, 30 years ago, the pattern had been, when a young person gets a little bit older, maybe get to college, they drop out of religion for a while, but once they start their own family, they return to their religion of origin, their religion that they were raised with. However, there is now a whole generation that has been raised by parents who themselves never went to church. So they had nothing to go back to when they got older. So you have a generation of parents that didn't go to any religious services, church, synagogue, temple, mosque. And so they raise kids who had no experience with it. And so as they get older, will they look for something, or will they just say, well, that was never a part of my life and I'm not interested in it? So yeah, this generational shift is having a big effect on where will the next generation of religious attenders come from. Now, from a Baha'i point of view, that might indicate that there's a population that's hungry for some kind of spiritual meaning, that don't have a place to return to, don't have a home, a spiritual home to go to. And so maybe, that's a teachable population.
Stephen Collins comments that there's a pattern of people returning to religion when they get older. For example, Rainn Wilson.
Right.
It's true.
That's true. But what I know of Rainn, I've read a couple of his books, that he grew up with a religion. But what we're talking about is kids who don't grow up with any religion because their parents aren't religious.
I knew Rainn Wilson, who, when as a youth, he used to be a security guard at the temple in Wilmette.
Oh wow. Uh-huh.
So his father used to work there at the National Assembly at the National Center. So I knew
Oh, wow.
him running around as a kid in Wilmette as a security guard.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So he eventually came back. What a lot of people are wondering about is people who have nothing to come back to because they weren't raised with religion. And then I see that I guess it's is that Stephen asked, has AI come to sociological impact on religion? Are people asking AI for answers to religious questions? That's a great question. I don't know.
No, it's not. It's this, that when you go to AI and you ask certain questions, the answers that come in are the answers that have been put in by us Baha'is.
Yeah.
And Stephen Collins was telling us here a few weeks ago that some of the information you ask about is information that he, in fact, has created on Baha'ípedia or Wikipedia.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, yeah. AI is only giving us what we have put in there.
Yeah.
Isn't that correct, Stephen? I wish he would show himself so we could ask
Now
him.
Yeah, Jane says, I was raised without religion, became a Baha'i on my own. So yeah, there are probably people out there who are looking for something, and the Baha'i faith can provide an answer. So I'm not saying that Baha'i should give up, that there's no there's not a population out there who we can teach, but
I'll
it's a
send you
different set of challenges.
I'll send you a PowerPoint I put together for Austin called Spiritual, Not Religious.
Right.
I will send you that PowerPoint along. I'm emailed you an article already to look at.
Okay. Great.
Other
And that's
questions?
what a lot of young people say, that they're spiritual but not religious. I don't follow any organized religion, but I have spiritual ideas.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Mike, I would like to share your presentation with my local assembly.
Okay.
I think this is interesting for our assemblies to be aware of.
Right.
If you don't mind sending me this one and the last presentation you were going to send me, both of those would be good.
Did I not send you the last one?
No.
Okay, sorry. I thought I did. Okay, I'll send them both.
A friend here, Bahman Yusufzadeh, says, I was raised a Muslim, became agnostic for 15 years before I became a Baha'i.
Yeah.
Bahman is a good friend from Nashville.
Right.
His real last name is Josephson, but he goes by Yusufzadeh.
Okay. Yeah.
Very funny.
It means the same thing, Joseph's son.
Yeah.
Yusufzadeh.
And we might find that the young people today who are not interested in religion become interested in the Baha'i faith because it's a different perspective, and it's in our understanding of progressive revelation, it's the most recent revelation from God. So we might find that those who aren't interested in any other organized religion become interested in the Baha'i faith for that reason.
Like, one of the questions that often comes up is that people are not interested in religion because they see religion as non-functional. It doesn't work.
Right.
And I've heard people, I recently talked to a friend who's into politics, and he was basically telling me that the war between Russia and Ukraine is caused because the Russian Orthodox head of the Russian Orthodox Church did not like the fact that they had established a separate Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And this religious head of the Russian Orthodox Church is fully in support of war. And he is. I mean, that I did read that. I don't know about the other, but that he's totally in support of the war. And when I see the Christians talk about religion and Jesus bringing love and peace, etc., and the head of a religion supporting war, you gotta say it's not working.
Right. Yeah, I think since the 1980s, because before the 1980s, you had almost an equal number of conservatives and liberals in any one church, because they did studies on this. You had an equal number of Democrats and Republicans identified their party identification in any one church or any one denomination. But since the 1980s, there's been this polarization where certain churches or certain denominations become known as conservative and some as liberal, and that kind of division. Thankfully, it is not in the Baha'i faith. All the research shows Baha'is are very that political conflicts do not enter into Baha'i communities. But they certainly have entered into churches. But that wasn't true before the 1980s.
We as a rule don't talk about. We
Right.
may have opinions, but we don't express them publicly.
Right.
I know I can't express my opinions with my children because they disagree with me profoundly. That's the Austin effect, Mike.
Keep Austin weird, huh?
This was an amazing presentation. I love the information you have had to share.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
I'm sure the National Assembly has all this information already.
I have written up a report. And I want to say that I want to thank the National Assembly for facilitating sending out all these surveys. Ken Bowers wrote a cover letter to send out. So the National Assembly has always been interested in this research. They see it as a way to get more information about the Baha'i community.
Did the Texas communities respond, actually? Austin, Houston, for example?
I'd have to look. I don't know. It was, there are approximately 1,000, maybe 1,100 LSAs in the United States, maybe a little bit less than 1,000 right now. We selected a random sample of 300 of them for this particular survey. So I'm not sure. I'd have to look to see if Austin or Houston or any other Texas community is in there. I'm not sure.
When was this sent out?
January of 2023. So 8 months ago.
I was already off the assembly by then. Adib was still on.
Okay.
Before he followed.
Well, I don't know if your it would have gone to your LSA secretary. I can look through and see if it went to that particular community. I'm not sure.
I'll see you Sunday. I hope you can tell me about it.
Yeah, I hope to be there. I'm glad I know you're going to be there. That'll be. What time?
10:30.
10. Yeah. All right.
They start at 10:30, so I'll show up.
Okay.
I just told them I'm going to drop in. I didn't agree to speak or anything. I'm just going to drop in. So, but we'll see.
Yeah, you'll be drafted.
Are you coming to the Baha'i Center?
Huh?
Ajit, are you coming to the Baha'i Center?
Yeah.
Meeting starts at 9:30.
Starts at 9:30?
Yes.
Oh.
Really? Okay. That's a little too early for me.
Wait a minute. Hold on. No, I'm sorry. I'm leaving home at 9:30. It is 10:30.
You leave home at 9:30. Okay. Yeah, 10:30. Yeah, 10:30.
All right.
Is right.
Yeah, it's a reasonable time. I have a couple of meetings tomorrow on Saturday and Sunday. I decided I'll just stay the night and drop in at the center.
Yeah. Good.
All right. Any other thoughts, questions before I thank my friend Mike profoundly for
It's been my honor.
and friends, anybody else have any follow-up questions? If you want to put your email in chat and you want me to put you on a mailing list, I also want to share with you this, that our next speaker is Dr. John Woodall, and he will be speaking on September the 1st. I will send out the emails, etc. For those of you that don't know John Woodall used to be a professor at Harvard University in Connecticut. He teaches psychology. He's a psychiatrist, I guess. There was this mass shooting at a school in Connecticut where so many children were killed.
Oh yeah.
And since then, he has become a big advocate for gun control and he's the face of gun control in the East Coast. And he's done a tremendous amount of traveling overseas. He's done a just wonderful amount of work. But you guys will enjoy meeting John, and I hope all of you will be there, and all of you will. When I send these invitations out, I hope you would share it with all your friends and invite your friends to come in and hear. And his talk, again, is building hope in desperate times. Basically, how do you build hope into the future generation? How do you encourage them to keep going? So it's an important topic, and I hope all of you will come. Zabin Van Ness from Seattle also wants to know if Seattle responded to the survey or not. So you can tell me that on Sunday, and I will let Zabin know.
I'll look it up. Okay.
All right. Then adios, everybody. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
joining in on Zoom and YouTube, everybody. And Adeep, thank you for helping out with this
Yeah.
thing.
Thank you, Adi.
Mike, wonderful job as
Thank
usual.
you.
Pleasure.
Good to see you
All right.
all.
Thank you, Mike. Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.